The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by Blooms in Omaha, featuring floral arrangements and gifts. And by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Andrea McMaster.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Consider This. I'm Andrea McMaster. Tornadoes are nature's most violent storms. Spawned from powerful thunderstorms, tornadoes can devastate a neighborhood, even a town, in seconds. A tornado can produce whirling winds that can reach 300 miles per hour. Damage paths can be in excess of 1 mile wide and 50 miles long. Preparedness is key for your safety. And that is the focus of this week's Consider This as we prepare for tornado season. And we are joined with Ken Dewey, the regional climatologist with the High Plains Regional Climate Center. Thank you so much for being here today,
You're very welcome.
Ken.
Glad to be here.
Based out of Lincoln, so we appreciate you making the drive. When we talk about tornadoes in Nebraska, we've already seen tornado season a bit in Nebraska last week with a couple of tornadoes touching down in western Nebraska.
Yes, we did. And tornadoes have occurred even earlier than that, even into early March. But the primary season is May and June, so we're getting ready for it. And just as the Swallows return to Capistrano, and just as every fall we have football games down in our stadium, every spring we begin our severe weather season with preparedness and getting ready for what could happen. And we look back as climatologists at what has happened to understand also our tornado patterns in our state.
Well, I want to talk about what you think might happen this year. I know that that's hard to say, but let's talk about what happened last year. And looking at last year as being a really unique year.
Well, last year, and this is one of the big concerns we always have, is complacency. We had a very quiet year last year, so it'd be very easy for people to be complacent and say, well, there really aren't all that many tornadoes around here. In 2004, when we had over 100 tornadoes in Nebraska, maybe that was probably the rare event, and it was. There was a lot of tornadoes. But last year was really the rare event. We had no tornadoes in the month of May in the state of Nebraska. Now, that's never occurred. We've collected tornado data since 1950, so we're looking at over 56 years of data. We've never had a May without tornadoes. Simple explanation, we're in the midst of a very severe drought, and we just had hot, hot, and hot without thunderstorms and storms. So we bypassed the peak of the season last year. That can't happen again. As we already found last week, the moisture's returned here. It's been a wet winter, a wet spring, and it's a much more active severe weather season expected in our region this year.
And preparedness is key. People can't be complacent.
Well, and we have to remember what we need to do every year, and there's some tragic events that can occur if we don't. A few weeks back, Enterprise, Alabama had a devastating tornado that struck a school while the school was in session. The teachers, in a panic, even though they knew better and afterwards felt very bad about it, pushed the kids and ushered the kids down the crowded hallways and into the auditorium, a very unsafe location to be. As the auditorium collapsed, it actually killed a few children and also injured quite a few more. So yes, this is the time of year where businesses, schools, and homes, and everyone that lives and travels through the state of Nebraska has to be aware. Safety is our number one concern this time of year, refreshing everybody into what is the best thing to do when severe weather comes to protect themselves, their family, their pets, their possessions, whatever.
When looking at the state of Nebraska, and I knew that you do a lot of mapping, where are tornadoes most likely to occur?
You would expect most tornadoes in Nebraska to be in Omaha and Lincoln. By virtue of the fact that's half of the state's population, there's so many more eyes watching the severe weather. There's a big surprise, and this surprise has existed all the way back into the 1950s. The majority of our tornadoes occur in the Hall County, Grand Island, Hastings, York, Rough area. We think, as researchers, it's related to the sandhills. The sandhills actually are very dry, and the air that comes out of there has a different density than the air down in the lower valley. When it interacts with storms, it seems to trigger them and make them even be more severe. So it's 4 times more likely to see a tornado out near Grand Island than it is in either Omaha or Lincoln.
So if you live in central Nebraska, really make sure you have a preparedness plan.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Talk a little bit about a tornado watch, the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning. When should people start paying attention?
Well, it's almost like a tone of voice that would be different as a parent might tell a child, now look out, watch out what you're doing, just be careful. And then when they're yelling, stop. So this is what we can't do. We can't change our tone of voice as we talk to the public. So we say, watch out. The conditions could develop to severe weather this afternoon. Now that's important as you go about your daily activities, to listen to the radio, to check the sky once in a while, to see where you are, to know where your family is so that you can get in contact with them. It's just being watchful. So a watch means, and it's issued hours ahead of time, that conditions are right today that could produce severe weather. The warning means it has been seen by radar, or it has been seen by trained spotters who we train every year through all the counties in Nebraska, or law enforcement who are also trained. The warning is particularly urgent to do something. Why, someone might ask? Because you don't have a lot of time always. Some warnings we only have minutes before the tornado strikes where people are. Other times we might have upwards of a half hour, 45 minutes. So you won't always know if you're going to have a long lead time between the watch and the warning. So it's always best to be prepared. While traveling, that means, do you have a good escape route? If you're coming down crowded Dodge Street, you might want to be thinking about that as the sky gets darker and it begins to rumble a little bit. And you better turn on that radio and turn off that CD that you're listening to and maybe hear, what are the current news reports? Where is that storm? And then it might just be time to get out of the heavy traffic. Because boy, what a mess it was back in 1975 when late afternoon that tornado came right up 72nd Street through Omaha.
And if that occurred again today, as we've talked in the past,
Right.
we would see so much more destruction and
Much
many
more
fatalities.
destruction today because there are more lanes, first of all, and more people. And much of the path of that original 1975 tornado was open country before it hit 72nd Street near the interstate. That's all built up now. So again, everybody needs to be prepared and ready for the unexpected. And that's what you should do every day in all of your life anyway. When you pull up to a green light or up to a red light and it turns green, we kind of expect the unexpected. We might look around to make sure no one's running that red light. It's just something we do as second sense. You might be, if it's late at night, you might want to look around you, and people do that automatically. So we're just saying this is a time of year, it's been winter, we haven't been thinking about severe weather. It's returning, and it's a good time to just refresh our memory and refresh our preparedness for the safety of everyone who lives and works here in Nebraska.
Does it drive you crazy as the voice really of tornado safety for when people grab their cameras and they go out on their front porch and they...
Oh, of course it does. And I have to be careful. I have 4 children and 8 grandchildren, and I know that I have a very stern voice when I'm speaking to my children, and who are in their 30s now, or my grandchildren. And I don't want to react that way to the public and say, now you know better. But it does frustrate me when I drive down a road and I see people rushing out, because the number one thing you need to do is not rush outside. You can take a quick look, but don't rush outside. Don't start closing windows. Don't go out into the backyard and pick up things. This is the time to gather everybody, your pets and family, into the house or at work to stay away from those windows and go to where it's safe. Most of the time, it will be a false alarm, because the tornado won't go down your particular street or your particular block where you are. We don't always know that, so we have to warn a larger area. But I think I'd feel a lot better knowing that everybody takes it seriously and they head on downstairs. Those tragic photographs that everyone sees every year of people that didn't heed a warning, that didn't do the right thing, and they were hurt. Unlike Hallam, where everybody did the right thing, the injuries and fatalities should have been way higher. But they weren't, because people did the right thing. Even back in 1975, for the most part, everybody in Omaha did the right thing. I know a few people told me when I came through and examined the damage area, oh, I lingered a little bit too long and I could see the tornado coming, but I knew right where I needed to be. And I had the door open to the basement and then I ran. So yes, this is the time of year where we need to be prepared that the watch could suddenly turn into a warning. And do we have a plan in mind? And yes, it does drive me crazy, because I'm one of the few that when the sirens are going, I'm heading out either to emergency management to volunteer and work there, or I'm heading out to a spotter location, or I'm heading out to actually document the storm with university students and gathering data.
And we do have some of your storm chasing photos,
Right.
so we can show some of those while you're talking
So
about
it
that,
may
because I
seem-
want to hear what that's like.
Well, it may seem hypocritical when we're saying don't do it. You know, it's like boys and girls
you
don't
have
do
the
this at
proper
home.
training.
But we've had the training and we know how to, and we have radar on board the car, we know right where the storms are, and we have a gridded system to know, a GPS system and a map in our car, so we at all times know our escape route and where the roads are, and we're in complete communications with law enforcement at the time as well.
Okay, well, we are looking at some of those storm spotting photos. What is this like when you're looking at the eye of a tornado through a camera lens?
Well, you know, it's interesting because everybody sees what it's like in that 30-second clip on the TV news, or they'll watch the Discovery Channel or the Learning Channel, or they see the movie Twister. It's not like that at all. First of all, we'll drive around for 6 to 8 hours, getting in position, following storms as they go through their life cycle, and then maybe nothing happens, and sometimes we come home with a good case of sunburn, and we don't see any storms. It's about 1 out of every 10 storms will be producing severe weather that will be photographic, or at least for us, research purposes, useful. Then, when the moment happens, we don't do this alone. The person who drives, and it sounds silly, they drive. They're not on their phone. They don't have a camera. They're not looking at a map. They're not communicating to anybody. They're driving. And the navigator is literally saying, in 5, we're coming up to an intersection on this 2-lane road, start slowing down, signal. At this stop sign, we're going to pull about 100 yards over to the right. They're constantly communicating. The people in the back have cameras out the windows, and we may have a van where we can have 2 rows in the back. They're busy writing notes to themselves, taking photographs, and then the navigator's responsibility is to place that vehicle in a safe location so that we don't impede traffic, that we're not going to slide into a ditch, so it's a good location, and that we can get out of there should hail suddenly come sweeping over the top of a hill towards us. So the driver at all times is so focused on driving, they sometimes feel cheated because they really haven't seen the weather. They're not looking around, they're not looking behind them, they're literally being guided through, and the navigator is probably the one that's the most stressed because they are communicating on the phone where they are, what we're seeing. They're the ones that are waving like this to a law enforcement officer, come on over here so you can see what we have in radar. You need to, as we did in Hallam, talk to law enforcement, wave them over to our vehicle and say, you need to shut down this highway. We think the storm is producing a tornado in the next few minutes. There's already a hail shaft. Let's not move any trucks and cars through there. He immediately said, thank you, because we have a wonderful working relationship with law enforcement as emergency management volunteers, both me and my students. So we immediately blocked off several highways to keep people out of harm's way. So it's both exciting, but at the same time, everyone is so focused. It's done very safely. And at the end of the night, the most important thing that we do, once all of the excitement is over, we just go to a fast food restaurant and we sit there for 1 hour to just decompress and relax before we go back out on the highway. And then it's funny because some of the students want to talk all the way home because you can tell it's been a lot of stress for them. And it's been safe, but it's also a very exciting experience. So for the next 3 or 4 hours, even though it might be 2 in the morning when we get back, they're just chatting up a storm.
Yeah,
because you can
sure
tell
they
they're
are.
working out like a little kid, all that tension that was there. And then I'll look around just as we're pulling into Lincoln, and they're all sound asleep in the car. And it's been a long day.
Well, I know you were out and about the evening in May 2004
Right.
when the Hallam tornado touched down, and that was, well, the most
Yes.
devastating recent tornado that we've had in the state of Nebraska, and 1 person did die in that tornado. I want you to share, since we have some wonderful photos of the destruction that were taken right after that event. The first ones that are coming up here are of Norris High School, which you've already said never seek safety in an auditorium during a
you can
tornado,
see
and
how-
here this shows a perfect example
Exactly
of that.
why, because those walls have actually fallen in on the bricks. The bricks of that wall have fallen in on the seats because the roof was lifted off. And as that's lifted off, there's nothing holding the walls together and they fall in. We saw this in Grand Island, in the elementary school there. The walls fell right into the gymnasium, which is why we worked aggressively in the 1970s and 80s to say all auditoriums are very unsafe locations. Large free span buildings, typically like a Walmart or a Shopko, and I'm not telling people don't shop there, I'm just saying don't be in the open area. They have a tornado shelter in the back, which will be safe for you. But those
I've been
big
in one,
buildings
by
and
the way.
grocery stores, they're not good places.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I've been shopping in a Target tornado shelter, but you know, they needed
Right.
to take the caution for their shoppers and their customers at the time. But what was it like arriving and seeing this devastation
Well,
just minutes after the Hallam
Andre,
tornado?
there's several things that are going on. First of all, we were there as it was occurring, and we were staying just out of harm's way. So we know where we are at all times relative to the storm. At one point, we got a little bit too close that we got worried. So I called home to my family in Lincoln, and my wife said, somebody keeps knocking at the door. And we live way out near Highway 2. And she said, but I don't see anybody there. It was debris actually falling and hitting the homes in far south Lincoln. And we pulled all of our vehicles, all 4, into a low-lying ditch where we wouldn't be flooded out, but debris was flying over the top of the car. our impression at that point, this tornado is a lot bigger than we thought. As we pulled through the area, and it was difficult to get out of there with down power lines and with debris, we couldn't get into Hallam, but we knew that something was bad because in the rural area near Hallam, there were farmhouses that were flattened and there was debris everywhere. We pulled out onto Highway 77. We looked to the left, and we all have inner mind that's going 100 miles an hour. My first thought is, why are they filming a movie tonight? Because it was a Hollywood movie, and you've seen it, where they have 100 rescue vehicles all going down the road chasing one car or something silly like that. We looked, and there were all these rescue vehicles coming down the road, and there was no traffic going north at all. As we pulled out of this gravel road near Princeton Road, just outside Hallam, we pulled across the side of the road. Nobody even thought of running a video camera. It was the most emotionally draining moment for everyone in our car in our entire life, realizing Armageddon has just taken place, because at that point we didn't know. We anticipated Beatrice was leveled. We didn't know at that point. We anticipated hundreds of fatalities. So our mind was not at ease until after midnight, when our then students who volunteer for working for disaster assessment were in that community and radioing back that they're accounting for almost everyone. And at that point there were 3 missing people and 1 known fatality. It was probably the most emotionally draining event, because when we typically go into a disaster site, it's the day after. We've already seen the photos on the news. We've already seen the description given to us, and we're prepared for it, and we detach ourselves like a state patrolman might do as he comes upon an accident. He's not going to get emotionally involved in it. He or she has to deal with it, cordon off the area, and deal with a tragedy. We're ready to do that because we've practiced doing that. But this was probably the most scary moment of all of our lives, and one student actually asked a week later, could we go completely through the path where we were that night, because he still was dealing with it. It was emotionally draining him how awful that night was. So he just wanted to go back to the site and see where the whole path of the tornado was, and then he was very happily going back out then doing research with us.
Well, I can tell you, I was there reporting on the scene after the tornado, and I can tell you still, and I've been back and doing reports a year after the tornado, and knowing that they're still dealing with, if they hear of any severe weather coming, you know, the psychological part that goes on, but a lot of them are taking extra precautions in building safe rooms. Do you recommend that in general for most of us?
When people hear a safe room, they go, now, I don't have enough money to build a safe room. You do. You can retrofit a closet in a house and make that be a safe room. It has to be, if you have 6 kids or something, maybe you need a bigger room than a closet. But safe rooms don't have to be a standalone out in the yard, although they can be. It may be thousands of dollars, $2,000, $3,000, but there are domes that can be built out in the backyard. They can also build them in the ground, and they can act as a party room where you can go in there and it's quiet and watch TV the rest of the year, but it can be a safe location, a takeoff on the old storm cellars that we used to have. But in places like Oklahoma that don't have basements, they have to build safe rooms in a garage. There is an absolutely startling photograph of a plant in Illinois that was a machine plant with lots of metal and machinery all over the place. That was brand new, about 10 years old, and they had a huge cement block safe room. Everybody was in there. When they came out of the building, they said they couldn't believe it. It looked like a war zone. Anytime I look at that aerial photograph, it's just complete mangled mess. All the cars are gone. They're all twisted into each other. Nobody had a scratch. Nobody was hurt. The National Weather Service wants me and others to say, look, a simple safe room. All they did is just reinforce the walls in an 8-foot by 12-foot area in that plant that was on a big cement slab. But it worries me because beyond a safe room, people might live in a house that doesn't have a basement. So they need to at least get to the middle of that house, lowest possible level, or get to know that neighbor that does have a basement, because that's what worked in Hallam. Everyone who did not have a basement was invited in, and in some cases almost dragged in because they didn't think it was that serious, into someone's house where they had a basement. And if they're in an apartment complex, there was a townhouse complex in Hallam, the whole top of it was completely gone. And this is what we saw in Omaha in 1975, Grand Island in 1980, and throughout the country as I do my research. Top floors, second and third floor of apartment buildings can be completely swept away. Motels, same thing, get into that first level, into the middle of that building is the safest location.
Well, a huge thing, when you go to the scene after a
Right.
tornado, you're looking at some of the damage, thinking, what could we learn?
Yes.
And so in Hallam, I know that you learned a lot about viewing some of the shelter in a basement corners.
Yes.
Viewing some of the damage, thinking maybe that's not the best place for people to go.
No,
So explain
absolutely
what
not.
you learned there.
Well,
We have some photos to show
One of the
you
things
there,
that we
too.
did is when we went into Hallam, we went in before the people returned to make sure it was safe. We didn't want some wood and debris covering a hole and someone could fall in and be hurt. Once we secured the area and everything was safe, then we allowed the residents in, and then we allowed some media in to limited areas. My job was to be there immediately to document what it looked like. I even went up in a highway department cherry picker and looked down over the whole city, and that's when I began to see there were homes that were virtually not totally destroyed, but they virtually just kind of shifted and moved over like they were on rollers. And I realized some of these older homes, like the one there, it's not attached. They just build them on top of these cement walls, and in that case you can see the front porch is about 10 feet off from the rest of the house. This is why we stopped in the 1960s saying go to the southwest corner. We don't need to understand why that was the advice. That was the advice. We've stopped for over 40 years. As I went around and took a photo of every building, people knew who I was, and they would come up to me and they would say things like, "I'm so sorry, man, I could have saved part of my house. I didn't open my windows. I didn't deal with opening my windows in time." I said, "No, you don't want to open windows." But somebody told me that. And then somebody else said, "I know I did the right thing. I went to the southwest corner." And I kind of muttered to myself, "No, you were lucky." I didn't want to yell at them and say, "No, you did the wrong thing." But I put these photos at the website to say, you've all got to learn that it might be your great grandma or your grandmother or somebody that said, go to the southwest corner. Don't do that. Go to the lowest possible level underneath, like some stairwells. The 3 or 4 stairs that go up out of a crawl space would be great underneath those stairs in the center of the basement. And if you are in the middle of the house and you hear we ask the people consider going to a restroom or a bathroom, that's because it's a small room, not if it's an exterior wall. I also have photos at our website showing bathrooms that are devastated because they had the outer wall ripped off during the tornado. It wasn't safe. It would have been safer to instead go into a small closet in the interior hallway. So for me, it's a learning experience the day of the storms, and then following the storms, and we go back and we look at the damage, because it helps me then prepare communities for the inevitable that's going to happen someday, severe weather striking their community.
Okay, we've talked a little bit about this along the way in the show about the 1975 tornado in Omaha.
Right.
There was the 1913 tornado in Omaha, which they just celebrated
Right.
the anniversary.
Right.
That was on Easter, and more than 100
Right.
people died in that tornado, and I know there's still some family members there
Right.
sharing those stories. If we were to have a tornado today, I want you to talk a little bit about our cities and how our cities can be better prepared. If we were to have a tornado like that today, of course we'd have more devastation and more deaths.
Right. Well, this is a typical good news and bad news. First of all, the good news. We have so much technology today that it's going to be hard to miss this storm coming. The beauty of last week's tornado outbreak in Nebraska was 24 hours ahead of time, it outlined an area from western Nebraska down to the Texas Panhandle and said, this is an area that tomorrow is likely to have, not a high likelihood, but it's a likelihood of tornadoes. And that happened 24 hours later right in that area. So the 1913 tornado occurred and nobody knew it was coming until it hit them. They didn't have any preparedness. They didn't have any spotters. They didn't know the safe place in the house to be. No wonder there were so many fatalities. So that's the good news. We're better prepared today. The bad news is not everybody's better prepared. We have many more people, and we're doing things that put us at great risk. A lot of people are in cars today. In 1913, they were not crowded on Dodge Street, bumper to bumper, 4 lanes backed up for miles. 1913, they'd step out of their house, they'd see something was coming, and they'd jump for cover inside their house. So we have a lot of people that are mobile today. They're in shopping centers, they're traveling on the interstate. So we do feel we're worried. And the reason we're worried is the Hallam storm split in 2. And if right where you are is Lincoln, the storm was coming right at Lincoln and at Hallam made a right-hand turn, broke in 2. This one died as it moved up towards York, and this one then moved off to the right through Hallam and then returned to its normal path and went right up, just missing Lincoln to the southeast of it by about 3 miles. Had it not split, that would have been our 1975 Omaha tornado going right up to the heart of Lincoln. So it can happen. And when it does happen, my worry is we have all this technology, maybe people feel kind of invincible, and they're not as vulnerable anymore because everybody's looking for it, and I'll be okay, and my houses are built better now, and I don't want them sitting in the front room watching TV, glued to the radar and the broadcaster describing what's going on when the sirens are going downstairs, middle of the structure, lowest possible level.
Can you say what this season is going to be like? Is there any way that you can get data to predict this is going to be a season?
Well, climatologists always look at trends. They look at what are the factors that are involved. And last year's lack of tornadoes was a result of a lack of thunderstorms, which is a result of drought. So the bigger question is the drought over? And all of a sudden I go, I don't know. It is right now. And right now, we had a wet winter where parts of the state had 400% of normal precipitation. The ground is wet at the surface. Now below the ground, it's still pretty dry, and we need to put more water into the groundwater, and the lakes are low. But the surface water is there that was missing last year. Last year, we hit 120 degrees up in South Dakota, 115 in Nebraska. It was hot, 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 and dry. This year, we're going back to what we normally have around here, hot and humid, as we move into our severe weather season, which means we're not going to have 2 Mays in a row without tornadoes. That's not a guarantee, so we look at likelihood. If you want to look at it, it's like an exit poll, and right now all indicators are hugely indicating that the atmosphere is lined up and ready this year for a very active season, much more active than last year, when Nebraska had the least number of tornadoes in 20 years. And both Nebraska and Iowa did not see a tornado right at the peak of their season in the month of May.
A couple minutes left, Ken, so I want you to share a little bit about the place you work, the High Plains Regional Climate Center. Why is it there, and what's the type of work that you do?
There are 6 regional climate centers, and our climate center handles the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, and then down into Nebraska, Kansas, and Wyoming and Colorado. And then Iowa, so I was going to say just immediately to our east, is in the Midwest Regional Climate Center. These 6 regional climate centers do 2 things. They handle all the data collection, so that if somebody in the media says, hey, how hot was it yesterday? What's the record high? Or how much precipitation have we had compared to normal? Or a contractor comes along and says, I want to build a highway, or I want an agricultural interest comes along, I want to start a vineyard in our area. What are all the weather and climate data? We can provide that to them. The other half of our job is to what my boss calls value added. We look at the data, we look and we analyze the impacts of what's going on. So the website that I run, which is Nebraska Weather and Climate Center, had 30 million visitors last year who came to look at storm stories, if you will, the impacts in our area. Last week when those tornadoes occurred from Nebraska down into Texas, within hours at our website we already were having people upload photos. I'm downloading the radar images and the data and the information so that the media the next morning could have that information. The night of the Hallam tornado at midnight, we already had photos at our website, and the next day they were pulled down and used in the Omaha World Herald as well as USA Today. So the other job that we do at the High Plains Climate Center other than data is to analyze storms. We can analyze drought, we can analyze blizzards, whatever is impacting us in our region climatically, we analyze it and put it at our websites for people to look at.
Well, I can tell that you love your job. That's why
Yes.
I love listening to you. So thank you so much, Ken
You're
Dewey,
welcome.
being with us today. And thank you for joining us on this week's edition of Consider This.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by Blooms in Omaha, featuring floral arrangements and gifts. And by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.